course on gut health, the sinonasal cavity and the mouth, for some reason, don't seem like the logical place to start. When people are talking about gut health, they immediately go to the stomach, intestines. But it turns out the whole journey through the gut has to begin at this central space of the head. And nature has really shown us some fascinating realities about the importance of these structures, the mouth and the sinuses. The very first thing to form in embryologic development turns out to be the hard palate that creates the foundation for the development of those sinuses, and perhaps even more importantly, the structure and shape of the mouth. We now know that with the malformation of that palate, we end up with a much shorter life. The symptom that is typical of a palate that doesn't form correctly is mouth breathing. And so as you switch from the relaxed nasal breathing that is ideal for the anatomical and biologic functions of the sinuses in the mouth, we start to see the emergence of chronic inflammation, chronic disease, and disorder. So this has a detrimental effect on longevity as much as it does quality of life. Some 8 years shorter lifespan expected for mouth breathers over the nasal breather. And so it's critically important that as we think about gut health, we start to really understand the relationship of the breathing with the position of the tongue, and the position of the jaw and its state of relaxation or stress, and then the role that it has in beginning the digestive journey as we go into the gut. The palate, as it forms, should form a flat surface that kind of forms this foundational effect, and that's determined by a lot of nutrients within the womb. As nutrients diminish in the womb and we start to get shortages in vitamin K2 and other nutrients, we end up with narrow palates that are keyhole in shape. And so rather than that broad, flat, hard palate across the top, you end up with a really tight, sharp, keyhole-like palate that is impossible for the tongue to get up into. So with that narrow, steep palate, the tongue doesn't rest on the roof of the mouth correctly and ends up resting on the bottom of the mouth, which pushes the back of the tongue backwards and closes off the relationship of the airway and the esophagus, which is obviously the entry point of the gut. This change in behavior of the mouth really can screw up the passage of air down into the esophagus at night and disrupt the flow of air into the lungs such that it disrupts sleep quality. And so for all of these little nuances to that mouth breathing phenomenon, we see a disruption in the beginning of the digestive process. When you are mouth breathing, one of the fundamental things that change is the amount of aerobic bacteria that are emphasized at night versus the anaerobic, or without oxygen, bacteria. And in an ideal situation, you want some aerobic bacteria throughout the day when you're eating, active digestion, but you need an anaerobic period in the mouth where you don't have much oxygen delivery to the bacteria there for the detoxification that are typical of the anaerobes. And so you want to detox the gums, the gingiva, and you want to detox some of the solubles that are left behind in your eating process during the day as you clean that process up at night. And so that closed mouth, relaxed breathing is a critical piece of this. If you find yourself to be a mouth breather, it is always critical to take this to an orofacial or dental expert who can give you some options on how to broaden that palate, get the tongue in the correct position, improve your quality of life, reduce vulnerability to chronic disorder, disease, and really extend lifespan. There's some simple devices that are now placed behind the teeth that can prevent surgery and things like that. Used to be the only option. But these are gentle devices that work actually with the tongue to reshape the hard palate even in adulthood. And so no matter your age, there's options to, over a 1-2 year period, radically change the foundation that you have for both breath and this digestive beginning of the mouth. Once you've got that establishment of nasal breathing and that nice anaerobic detox overnight, the pathway into your connection to nature becomes obvious here at the mouth. Food ultimately is one of the most fundamental aspects of pleasure in the human lifespan. So much so that the Greek philosopher Epicurus was very poignant in developing a whole science of philosophy around the purpose of humans, and it related to our five senses. He really understood that the purpose of humanity was to sense the environment, and for sensing it, find beauty and pleasure in it. And so Epicurus would become the root for Epicurean, obviously, the science of food. But we also see it being the foundation of other religious sects and everything else that came out of that experience of realizing that we can reach almost this divine state of existence, this connection to the divine through our sensory pleasure. And it was very clear that food was the avenue into this. So Epicurus did a lot of studies back, a couple thousand years ago now, looking at the impact of that pleasure of taste on human behavior. And of course, we find that the pleasure of taste has antidepressant qualities to it, anti-anxiety qualities to it. It has this buoyancy to it when we start to taste our food again. We lost this phenomenon over the last 100, 150 years as we started to move our nutrition from the backyard and the abundance of biodiversity of herbs, spices, and the like that dominated the human experience for the last couple thousand years, and moved into this relationship of fat, salt, and sugar as the main purpose of food delivery. Food science really emerged in the 1940s and 50s in the post-World War II era. And with the advent of food science, we saw the breakdown in our relationship to the subtle flavors. Food scientists got together and they studied what made people eat, what made people choose one meal over the next. And what they found is they could supersede the usual preferences for biologic diversity on the palate if they put enough fat, salt, and sugar into that single bite. And so they found this cocaine-like behavior where with that fat, salt, sugar recipe correct, people would go back to that meal no matter how many times it was given to them. They wanted that over almost anything else. They would actually want it over sleep. They would want it over sex. That fat, salt, sugar combination became so powerful in food science and experimentation that it started to shape all food industry. McDonald's was the first to really master this in their science. McDonald's really became that first, food delivery system to really study the behavior of eating to the recipes that were put into it. 50, 60 years later, we would see the advent of the functional MRI that would give us a view into the brain as it functions throughout the day and activities. And the study of the functional MRI and the brain on food has been fascinating to watch, that the drug cocaine actually has a near identical effect on the frontal lobes and other parts of the brain as that fat, salt, sugar combination of a typical fast food meal will have. And so we need to come to terms with the fact that we lost pleasure, or we supplanted pleasure for the drug effect of dopamine. And so we really were going after this drug rush of the fat, salt, sugar thing, just like a mouse or a rat will, and they will sacrifice all things to get to that fat, salt, sugar combination. So the pleasure of a nuanced meal versus that rapid cocaine effect of the fat, salt, sugar became what shaped the last 50, 60 years of our food system. If you go to any chain restaurant, anyone that's gone national, you can go compare their food items and you're going to find out that regardless of what the menu looks like, their fat, salt, sugar combinations are going to be near identical. If they were able to scale to a national level, it means that when people are driving down the road and they see that sign for that restaurant that they've had that cocaine hit before, there's a very high propensity for them to take that left turn and go back to what they know, instead of checking out the mom and pop, farm stand and check out the local, food scene. The drug effect got so powerful that it changed the shape of retail, changed the shape of the food system in businesses locally. And so we have to back up now as a society and decide whether we're going to go ahead and go after food as a drug or go after food as true pleasure and a source of fellowship. Because ultimately, when you begin the journey of food, it should be shared around a table. We have seen in the blue zones that the likelihood of living to 100 has a lot to do with the opportunity to sit around tables and share with multi-generational community those meals that have been so studied. The blue zone diets are vastly different. What they eat, what altitude they're at, their proximity to ocean, etc. There seems to be just no correlation between these communities worldwide, with the exception of this commonality, that they have a social structure where it's multi-generational sharing of food and other aspects of the daily culture. Unfortunately, in the United States and many Western countries now, we're consuming 30% of our meals alone behind the steering wheel of a car. And so we are no longer mindfully engaging with our food. And there's no point to it, really. If you're going to pick up fast food, there's no point to sharing it with other people, because your dopamine drug effect is going to be the entire brain experience. And so we need to set down the drug for a moment, start to remember the power of flavor, start to remember the power of nutrients within our food, and the importance of sharing community around that food. And so as we start to think about the mouth, I want you to start to think about pleasure in the deep, nuanced way that nutrition can be sensed. The tongue is a magical laboratory instrument for you. As you probably recall from elementary school or the like, you memorized at some point the different parts of the tongue that favored sweet, salty, umami, etc. And maybe you've even done those studies where you get blindfolded and somebody puts lemon on the tongue where you detect sweet, and then instead of tasting lemon, you taste sweet. And so it's the entire tongue with all of its different receptors working in concert to give you the experience of the full pleasure of food. But to achieve that level of pleasure, we need the tongue to be able to engage all of the areas of the food, and vice versa. We need the food to churn around the entire tongue so that each part of the tongue can experience and taste and send that nuanced subset to the brain to give you the full pleasure. What we find in the drug environment of modern food systems is you don't chew long enough to even taste the food. You swallow it within 2 or 3 chews. As soon as you think you can get it down the pipe, you're swallowing it. Only small parts of the tongue were necessary to engage because there was so much sugar in that coffee or in that bite of French fries. It's insane how much sugar they put in just about everything. The amount of sugar in a fast food hamburger is insane. So you got tablespoons and tablespoons of sugar that are added in there, so that in those few chews that you do, as it moves across the tongue, they want to make sure you engage that sugar detection across the tongue. The salt is obvious, and then the fat gets detected as it goes through the system as well. So you got this beautiful system designed in food chemistry to speed up the process of eating and to make sure you always go back to that same stimuli. To slow it down and really start to experience our food again, we're going to need to chew more. And there's a beautiful effect on the digestive process when you start to re-engage this one volitional way to participate in the gut, which is how many times do you chew each bite? And I find myself very guilty of this one. Sometimes, as a teacher, you're teaching something for yourself more than others. But I have definitely been learned into a process of fast eating, productive life, and then working in hospitals and schedules and everything else, eating between patients. It became a lifestyle to eat as fast as possible. And it was kind of a superpower. If I lived my life and only spent 20 minutes a day consuming food, that left me 23 hours and 40 minutes to do everything else I wanted to do. What I was missing was the real pleasure of the food experience. And the last 10 years of diving into the regenerative agricultural system and the food systems at large has given me the opportunity to start to slow my roll, start to downshift when I put food in my mouth, and really take the time to be in gratitude and experience the vast amount of information that I can get out of that food. Make sure I'm releasing that medicinal experience of just taste and smell from my food long before it gets to my gut. It turns out that chewing also has an incredible impact on the actual digestion and ultimately the nutrient bioavailability of the food to the distant intestines. The amount of anatomical design and the biologic function of the salivary system within your mouth should really demonstrate to us the importance of careful, mindful chewing of each bite. These glands sit in 3 major spots. The big ones, the parotid glands, are up in your cheeks, tucked in there below the zygomatic arch that forms your cheekbone there. And then you have the submandibular glands, which are the next largest, and they sit right below the jaw here. And then you have the sublingual sitting below the base of the tongue. And that set of glands are responsible for a whole series of different introductions of digestive enzymes. As you go through the chewing process and you go from 3 to 5 chews to that 10 to 20 chews, you're going to start stimulating the parotid gland, submandibular, and the rest by the literal muscular motion that squeezes on those glands as you chew. So the mechanical process of chewing is literally pumping your digestive enzymes out into the food to prepare them for this future bionutrient availability that's critical for their successful passage through the small intestine and ultimately to the colon. In this way, it's really impossible to overemphasize the importance of getting more chews per bite and enjoying that food in the process. And so by chewing each bite 20, some sciences would suggest 50 times a minute, but at a minimum, that 20 is a pretty easy target. And you'll notice by the time you get to 8 to 10 chews that your brain is saying, "Oh, you should just swallow this thing." You've so conditioned your brain that once it's small enough and soft enough, you can swallow it. You'll find out that as you keep moving from chew number 8 to 10 to 20, you're going to get an experience of different flavors all the way through that journey. You're going to start to sense nuanced flavors at chew 18 compared to where you were at 2. Your tongue is fully engaged at that point, and the saliva that's coming from the dominant salivary glands within your head are starting the process of making the bionutrients emerge from the structure of the food. Your cruciferous vegetables and all your fruits and vegetables really are designed within fiber structures that carry many of the micronutrients and medicines within your food. And the mechanical chewing combined with the salivary gland dumping of digestive enzymes begins to expose that world of the nuanced medicine and micronutrients within the food out of that fiber matrix of your fruits and vegetables. And in that process, it's liberating new experiences for your tongue and for your pleasure. Slow your roll and start to chew 20 times per bite, and you're going to get a whole different experience with that relationship to your food. Beyond pleasure, improving digestion, and beyond digestion, you're also going to stimulate the electricity of the body. It turns out that we are light beings. The whole purpose to eating is to release light energy from the food that we're consuming. Human cells can't do that part, but the microbiome does. So the bacteria and fungi and all this in the gut will do the initial digestion to deliver all of those potential nutrients and resources to the liver. And then the liver passes that on to the mitochondria, which are tiny little bacteria that live inside your cells, to release the light energy. And so that relationship between stem to stern, of food to light, is ultimately there to start to move light energy, ultimately in the form of electricity or magnetism. It will move that through the body, through the system of what has been termed meridians in ancient Chinese medicine and other practices. The meridians are literally like an electrical wiring system that sits just deep to the skin. And that wiring system of the meridians allows for the transit of energy throughout our body. And it's not just to get to the body. It's actually a vortex type motion of energetics that the body will create when it's in its vital state. And so that vortex flow that you will create through the meridians actually brings us back to the mouth, because at the tip of each of the meridians is a tooth. And there's been big science done over many thousands of years, but it's really been brought to light in new ways in the last 50 years around the role of each tooth and its impact on the health or disease of the meridian on which it would lie. Some examples of this are breast cancer. Some 80% or more of the women who will present with a breast cancer have had a root canal in the first molar on that same side as the breast cancer. It turns out a root canal is a really devastating thing to oral health and ultimately to the immune system, and it stresses, therefore, the entire meridian connected to that tooth. A root canal is done when a cavity is thought to have damaged the tooth enough that it's going to cause chronic pain to the nerve within the tooth. And so they drill out the nerve and the blood supply to that tooth and immediately kill the tooth. And they leave that dead bone in the body. Think about leaving dead bone in your arm or in your leg in the case of an injury. It would be immediately noxious to the body. It would break down. It would need to be rejected or dissolved. It would cause a festering abscess, lots of different problems there. But the problem becomes actually worse in the setting of a tooth, in that the tooth while it slowly decays in the mouth after a root canal, starts to form within weeks microfractures that allow bacteria to get into the root of the tooth. And as that tooth becomes this home to many different bacterial species, anaerobic and otherwise, that are now dwelling in a space that should not have had bacteria in it, we force the immune system to have a chronic stimulation to that tooth. And so within a year of a root canal, every single root canal is chronically infected and causing a chronic inflammatory drain on that entire meridian. Similar to the biologic phenomenon and stressor of a dead bone left in the body, as we see with the root canal, one of the other common sources of chronic inflammation that we see in the mouth that has extremely detrimental effects on long-term health is that of the gingiva. When the gums become inflamed and you get something called gingivitis, we see an extraordinary acceleration of cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease includes that of the heart, leading to things like angina or chest pain and ultimately heart attack, but also of the brain, strokes and the like. And so the relationship between the gums and the cardiovascular system is quite fascinating in that there's a massive venous supply to the mouth to get this much turnover of saliva and digestive enzymes and metabolic precursors and the regenerative effect that's necessary at the gums and teeth interface, because there's so much mechanical damage to those surfaces every day. To get all of that action going, to get that healing to every day match the rate of damage, we need an enormous amount of blood supply. And so the body has designed a huge blood supply to the jaw and teeth and the gums themselves. Interestingly, the majority of the body's microbiome is protected away from the cardiovascular system by structures like the liver that filter everything that comes out of the gut before it goes to the heart. But in the case of the mouth, there is no interface, there's no filter to save the day between the mouth and the heart. And so as we start to develop dysbiosis of the mouth, and you get halitosis, bad breath, you start to get dental caries or cavities, you are starting to develop the risk of chronic inflammation in the gums, which breaks down the immune system's relationship to the microflora. So not only are you getting dysbiosis, you're starting to challenge your ability to keep that bacteria where it's supposed to be within that interface of the saliva, the gum, and the tooth. So as that immune system breaks down, we start to translocate bacteria and break down products from those bacteria, metabolites. It can even be nutrient, segments and stuff coming out of the chewing that actually start to get into the bloodstream directly and directly to the heart from there. That is likely the cause of this relationship between gingivitis and heart disease. And so we want to make sure that we're practicing the best vascular health possible by keeping the gingiva as clean as possible and as biodiverse as possible. From a behavioral standpoint, one of the common things that's underlying gingiva is chronic exposure to alcohol. And the most common cause of that alcohol exposure is not actually at the bar, but actually in mouthwash. So again, drop the mouthwash for sure. Try to avoid heavy alcohol exposures along the gums, teeth, etc. As you're consuming beverages and the like. Interestingly, a straw can help protect against that. And so drinking that cocktail through a straw actually may protect the gums to some degree rather than pushing that into the gum surface without that straw. So there's some ways to reduce that exposure perhaps. But the important thing is if gingivitis is present in your mouth, you need to immediately think about what are all the impacts or influences that are antimicrobial in my mouth. Get rid of the mint toothpaste, cinnamon toothpaste, get rid of the mouthwash. Make sure you're not getting consistent alcohol exposure across those gums to give them a chance to begin the recovery process and get more fiber into the diet. More fiber has been proven again and again to be the nutrient that reduces cardiovascular disease. And one of the reasons for that is high fiber diets improve the oral microbiome, improve the relationship of that microbiome to the gums, to the teeth, and therefore eliminate this leak of contents of the mouth into that cardiovascular system. The meridian from the first molar, often called the kidney meridian or the maternal meridian, it's not only connected to the first molar, it's also connected to emotional stress. And so we tend, male or female, to put kind of our maternal nurturing stressors on that single kidney meridian, left and right. And so when we damage that meridian with a chronic inflammatory stimulus over many years of a root canal, we start to decrease its vitality. The real crisis of health, where we start to run into these issues such as cancer and things like that, happen when we start layering on these stressors on the same meridian. So you get a root canal and you get this chronic biologic stress and inflammation, and then you add to that the emotional stressors of the home or your daily lives, that kind of nesting stress that we would put into that kidney meridian. Worried about the health of the kids, you're worried you don't have enough financial stability in the home, lost the job. All of those stressors get put into that same meridian. And so we find again and again in my clinic that it's the overlay of emotional burden with this biologic inflammatory burden that tends to result in autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue, chronic pain syndromes, and ultimately things like cancer. And so the tooth really is the beginning of making sure that these electrical meridians where we process emotions stay in their thrive state. Just like jumping on a trampoline to stimulate bone turnover and all of that, or impact exercise to strengthen those bones, the teeth are the same way. And so if you are hardly chewing your food at all and you never get to the point where the food is actually liquefied, your teeth may not be clacking together much at all during the eating process. And so you're not stimulating regeneration of the bone within that tooth and its roots. And so it's always a good idea to chew for the digestive purposes, but there's also another purpose deeper to that, which is this kind of electrical and regenerative components of the tooth itself, the bone remodeling, and this deep electrical stimulation to send signal to that entire kidney meridian that food is coming, get stimulated, get activated, wake up because nutrients are coming. There's an opportunity for you to be renourished. That's what the meridian can be telling you every time you chew. And so really getting into this routine of chewing deliberately, getting the food to its full potential of flavor, digestive capacity, and electrical and neuromuscular stimulation is just a beautiful opportunity. The whole rest of the digestive tract that we're going to talk about, as soon as you hit the back of the throat on down to the rectum, is all taken care of by your subconscious brain. The vagus nerve does the vast majority of that subconscious parasympathetic rest and digest kind of metabolism and functions, the smooth muscle, etc. So this is really the only point that you get to actively, volitionally participate in the quality of health impact of your food. How many times do you chew, and how good are you at tasting your food? One of the delightful things about getting into this, engagement where you're co-creating your food experience by paying attention to the chewing and the flavors is that you're going to start to change the preferences of the brain. You're going to find yourself going after the sweet stuff much less. You're going to find yourself going after the fat-salt combinations far less. You're going to start to lose interest in the things that used to drive your behavior because you're starting to turn on not just neural pathways, but energetic pathways that are being stimulated by this pleasure effect of deliberate, mindful eating. I have so much joy with the idea that this course on gut health is going to introduce you to nature again. The human experience, after hundreds of years of technologies that have divorced us from our nature in the pursuit of comfort, have left us completely devoid of the real pleasure of being alive. So as we study from the mouth and the nose all the way down through the gut, the take home, I hope again and again, is, oh my gosh, I'm hardly living. I've got such an opportunity to re-engage. Nature has created a palette of colors to visually experience, a palette of scents for my nasal olfactory journey, and an extraordinary array of flavors for me to engage with, such that I can see beauty in every bite. And the experience of seeing beauty triggers the vibration of love. It is time for us to fall back in love with our food systems through this mindful, intentional process of eating that begins with the mouth. So what do we do in our day-to-day then for oral hygiene? What do we do in our day-to-day to really promote this mouth health? In addition to the nasal breathing, keeping that mouth closed during sleep especially, in addition to chewing more deliberately and for longer with each bite, we want to make sure that we're not doing other things in the day-to-day that are undermining the health of our mouth. What we generally find is the consumer goods that are usually applied to oral health are actually just doing symptom management or cover-up of real fundamental problems that are afoot in the mouth. And a lot of these boil down to the microbiome. The microbiome of the mouth is going to determine your breath. Do you have good breath? Do you have bad breath? And halitosis, which is a medical term for bad breath there, is one of the primary indicators of dysbiosis within the body. And what we tend to do when we have bad breath is we start to eat a bunch of peppermint or mint gums, which are inherently antimicrobial. And so we're chewing gum, and then we brush our teeth with mint or cinnamon or some other strong scented toothpaste that will try to cover up that breath, not realizing that the mint or the cinnamon within that toothpaste is also antimicrobial and decreasing the biodiversity of the mouth. And so if you have an issue with bad breath, let's stop trying to cover it up and let's start to get to the root cause of why that is. The most common contributor to that bad breath is mouth breathing. Again, when you are breathing oxygen through the mouth all night long, you never get that anaerobic detox that's typical of a good nasal breath during the night. You'll end up with that bad breath kind of fundamental smell of putrefaction or acidification of that breath. And so things like mouth tape and other things can be used to make sure that you've got that mouth closed at night. But to engage with those, I usually recommend you really see a holistic dentist or orofacial maxilla specialist who can really take a look and see if there's structural problems as to why you're mouth breathing. So get a team involved that can start to get at this. There are orofacial physical therapists that really are experts in helping you relearn how to use the tongue, where to position the tongue during the day, where to position the tongue during sleep, and how to use the tongue during the eating to improve the metabolic and digestive environments of the mouth. That will then reduce the amount of bad breath and the like, as well as extend life as you start to reduce that dependence or that tendency towards mouth breathing. Following the common contributions of mouth breathing to bad breath, there are some nutritional behaviors that I find also will typically do this. And the two macronutrients that can easily be overdosed to end up with bad breath are excessive intake of protein or refined sugars. High-density proteins, especially extracted proteins like pea protein that's been extracted out of the pea and is focused into a smoothie or something like that, extracted soy elements that are processed foods, or the high-density compounds within dairies and meats. Those compounds, when they become the dominant macronutrient in the mouth, will fundamentally change the mouth flora and start to really foster the growth of the bacteria that lead to that halitosis or bad breath. And so with a chronic bad breath issue, we want to move towards a change in diet that involves a lot more complex carbohydrates with their partnered fiber that's natural to the food. Complex carbohydrates are coming typically in your legumes, grains, vegetables, fruits, and the like. And so those high fiber diets are going to have a lot less issue with bad breath than you will with the high protein, high sugar, low fiber diets. The other issues that I often see contributing to bad breath and chronic disturbance of the mouth flora and this dysbiosis is the chronic use of antimicrobials in your daily hygiene of the mouth. Mouthwash is one of the most common of these. Mouthwash typically has an alcohol content in it, and it has a lot of antimicrobials in there. And so your body just cannot find balance in that ecosystem of the mouth if you're chronically killing it back with these antimicrobial compounds. So as you're shopping for your dental hygiene resources, I would strongly recommend we drop mouthwash altogether and start to look for toothpaste that don't have lots of mint and cinnamon in there, as those are going to have the antimicrobial qualities. So pick a toothpaste that's got either an unscented, unflavored experience for you, or one that is avoiding at least those two. And next up, you're going to want to find something that has as little as possible the emulsifiers, preservatives, and the like in them. Fluoride is also a big conversation point around toothpaste, and in general, I try to avoid that. Chronic daily exposure multiple times a day to fluoride through your toothpaste, I think, has a very cumulative risk to your brain health and other systems within the body. And if your dentist is really recommending fluoride use once a year or something like that, I'm less worried about that than I am that daily chronic exposure of fluoride through your dental compounds. And so natural toothpaste is a big piece. It's gotten a lot easier to do this in a lot of ways. There's now toothpaste tablets that have got almost no preservatives in them, which is really nice. They come in just a tiny little chalk tablet. You chew on that, and then as it foams, you brush. That has probably the least amount of weird additives in it that you'll find out there. But then there's really great solutions out there. The cleanest one really is something like Dr. Bronner's, where you're getting towards just a natural solute instead of trying to like cover things up. You're really just scrubbing the teeth quickly with a gentle soap-like action rather than trying to put a bunch of fibrous material or granular material against the teeth. But if you're going to go after those kind of whitening toothpaste and all of that, then I would go for the ones that are charcoal dominant or have arrowroot powder as a dominant. Those toothpastes that have baking soda in them, I recommend against in general, just because they have an antimicrobial effect with the baking soda due to the pH change there, and also can cause some noxious injury to the gingiva or gums. The mouth is such an interesting starting point for intimate relationship. You've certainly done this if you've lived to anything past probably 5th grade. That might date me. Maybe it's 4 years old now that people are kissing. I have no idea. But that moment of that first kiss is such an interesting biologic experience. And there's extraordinary benefit to kissing. We've seen health benefits to it measured in many different studies through different aspects. The process of kissing has a biologic effect at the neurochemical level, at the microbiome level, at the emotional level, and ultimately at this energetic connection to the other partner involved in that process. The kiss is the beginning of intimacy, and it's an interesting one. It's odd that we would choose to smash our faces together. You don't see other animals doing this in that way. You'll see dogs go and sniff each other's butts, but they don't go smash their lips together and mush them around for a while and swap saliva. And so it's interesting that as humans, we have adopted this technique of initiating intimacy at our mouth. And it probably has a lot to do with the way in which our sensory processing in that mouth, the way the tongue functions, the way the tongue senses its environment, the way in which the pleasure center of the brain senses everything going on in the lips, the tongue, the mouth, that has shaped this behavior. It is likely that we have the most sensual mouth in nature because of the way in which we use it in our intimate relationships. We are given this opportunity to be sensual in our engagement with our food. When I watch animals eat, I watch them in a very engaged, present fashion getting that food in. It's very intentional, it's very pragmatic. But when you see a dog go over to the bowl that's just been set down, it's not like hanging out with 5 friends for an hour talking around the dog bowl. It gets that stuff done. And then it goes and enjoys the process of digestion, and it's in this relaxed state, and maybe goes to sleep for a bit, and certainly enjoying the process of food. But it doesn't, as a dog, have that sensual experience of not only the taste and everything else going on, it doesn't have the tendency to go and share that experience with others and create fellowship out of this food moment. And so the intimacy with our food may be very distinct to our species. And I think it's a very incredible opportunity for us to learn how to create a world around us, to recreate a social and civil society that re-embraces nature and becomes co-creative with her rather than extractive and destructive as we have become. So as we begin this journey into the gut, I think there's a real opportunity for us to consider the opportunity for us to engage in a new way with this sensual relationship to our food, perhaps celebrating our species' unique capacity for this sensory and sensual experience of relationship with our food. In so doing, I believe we can envision and start to co-create a future in which we reintegrate all elements of our day back into nature, rather than continuing to avoid and remove ourselves from that nature in some pursuit of comfort. It's time for us to sense nature again. It's time for us to experience her beauty again so that we can feel the vibration of love. It's what we're here to do in the end. If we have a purpose, I believe it's embodied in those 3 things. And I think the mouth is uniquely positioned to begin that journey.